You insider people and you people here. Before I start tonight, I plan to sort of tonight or sometime in the near future to go into, on these public tapes, a little something again specifically about the kinds of things somebody can do, or to be blunt about it, the kinds of things that you've got to do. And as some of you may have noticed throughout the years, I've become less inclined to specifically speak in such a way, because once you put a description, it tends to become a mantra. Even if not with those who hear it, then I tend to, using I metaphorically, tend to continue to repeat it for a while. But let me point out that all of you should be knowing, I keep assuming that you do it on your own, that you figured out on your own, that you already understand it. But all of this, the experience of anything extraordinary, in some way you approach in your own way, through bringing this foggy, hazy, out of control thing, sometimes people call their mind, that more aptly could be called consciousness, is you've got to stop it. You've got to, in your own way, for no reason, you've got to stabilize it. You've got to bring it under a kind of control. And there's been all these described attempts in the past of trying to remember your breath, which seems to tie it to something physically and is a very interesting, intriguing, basic approach. And no one is just to do it on the basis it seems more mental. It's the idea of trying to remember oneself. All of you should be knowing this. As vague as I can talk for the last few years and just seem to be talking about life and men in general, is you have got to be doing something. And I can continue to come up with descriptions because everyone has to continue to come up with their own way. I covered tonight in one of the news items that you have got to deal with some singular method, except you've got to continually reinvent the singular method for yourself. But one is, you could make it a non-permanent mantra, or a reminder to yourself, is like heads up. Is in the midst of what's going on in your head, you've got to recall heads up, and it's the same old thing as you bring yourself into a state of awareness which is more directed and more precise than your normal state, even though your normal state is called awareness and you can live through it. You can live by it. But as this whole thing is just floating, running on, as hazy, as undirected, as inspecific, it's to remind yourself heads up, and it's as though a head in the center of your head pokes its head up like from a primordial swamp of consciousness, and it's like a frog that suddenly looks like he got over his hangover and looked around like, you've got to do it. And one other thing, I can't tell you any more about this than I can consciousness, but I feel that I should mention to some of you, other than non-fatal illnesses, other than illnesses that need constant specific attention, there is a way in which it has been found by some in life, I can vouch for it, that there are certain kinds of what appears to be in the beginning continuing physical ills or maladies that one can suffer, and which you may be very quite proper that you seek some sort of treatment, even medication. And I know this is going to sound vague, but there is some way in which, if you sort of lose interest, go ahead, there's no description of this, you go ahead and take your medication. Let's assume it's something that they say you need medication, and the medication initially, alleviates the problem, or mediates it. And you go ahead and you continue doing that, and there's a way in which I cannot describe to you, I'm not going to try, that you sort of lose interest, and it's an extended form, I'm almost tempted to say to you that's a form of medivesco, since I made up that anyway, but it's like a mystical level medivesco. And that you can, verging on what would appear to be the quite unusual, if not miraculous, some of these maladies can end up disappearing. It's as though you treat them in the way that, in the beginning, the only way you can, and I could draw a comparison that the only way that people apparently can become more conscious is by listening to someone like me talk. But then, finally, ellipsis, start the tape. Bye. Goodbye, Netherlands. When life became aware that this one guy was planning to start talking about it and its future in ways unusually close to its normally unrecognized reality, it told him that he could do so, but only if he never hinted that any of it was in any way a matter of seriousness. Yeah. And of course, the man was more than delighted to agree. Just, of course, to throw life totally off his scent. And, oh yeah, sigh, life insists that I tell you that that was all just fiction, that I just made it up, which evidently life doesn't seem to realize just helps throw itself off the track. But hey, that's life. It can do anything it wants to, right? And now for some news from our zoological desk. Only animals what can think can be thrown off a track. Same as that recent anatomical update noted that only those organs with only 2 legs can go around in circles. And no, I don't have a clue as to what that means either. Compared to this sort of activity, the neat advantage to being ordinary and believing that you have circumstantially caused psychological problems is that after establishing that, nothing else is required or needed. And of course, the ordinary will say, well, how about cures? And there you are. The distinction again, made as clear as a buzzard's conscience. Criticism has no significance. It does, but not as men believe. The only thing that matters to life is continuity, even when it comes to man and thought. One man, intrigued with the possibility of an extraordinary adventure, stopped everything he was doing and took up sitting quietly still and nothing else. After pursuing this for some time, he changed to dancing, jumping around, whirling, just staying on the move all the time. After that, he took up nonstop talking. He would yammer on about anything for any length of time, even if no one was listening but him. There came a period after that when he commenced to be totally silent. No matter what, he would not speak. People intrigued with the idea of some extraordinary inner adventure in this life will try the darndest things. I added that last line just because life always gets such a bang out of it. And the speaker delivered tonight's sermon. The simple believe in extra systemic deities. Those a bit less simple believe in dirt. Even at ground level, evolution marches on, even though its steps seem unsteady and direction uncertain. End quote. And just between wow and thou, I wouldn't show up for the next service expecting him still in the pulpit. Whenever he'd say I, this one man would add, speaking metaphorically, a man asked a mystic, is the enlightenment the experience of realizing the secret? Is it an internal going forward or a returning to something? And the mystic began jumping up and down and slapping his thighs and yelling, now you've got it, now you've got it. The mind plainly defined. The mind, looking where life points. It's alleged that on some lesser developed planets are creatures who are unable to see, not in the dark, but rather cannot see the synonymy of nouns with verbs. Those of you active in mathematics and theoretical physics might be further interested to know that also on such worlds, which for the sake of example, let us say consist of 5 dimensions, have great difficulty experiencing the existence of any dimensions beyond 5. But moreover, if it makes you feel any better, The intellectuals in such realms compensate for their lack of experiencing this by being able to conceive of mental models thereof. No offense to science, but not at all that different from the relationship between religion and the actual excursion into new areas of consciousness. Just as thought never exhausts reality, so also does thought never exhausts thought. Does that give you something to look forward to, or what? At a level not visible or audible at the normal one, the simple stay weak and sick by saying that they are, while the uncommonly well never speak of their health. A man once sat and pondered this: is there something I should be learning from the fact that the brain itself cannot make any sound? And just then his stomach growled, reminding him of the fact that noise from instinct is inescapable, but from one's mind, otherwise. One chap on the quest kept, written on a slip, which he kept in his pocket, this reminder: wheresoever thou findest seriousness, thou findest barriers to thy path. And wheresoever is linearity is seriousness. His mind kept up a constant insistence that he should dispose of the note. A side story to one of man's creation myths. 'Tis said that when the animals in the garden saw what happened to Adam, they one and all decided to skip becoming conscious enough to be talkative so as to ever have to answer for their behavior. The son of a mystic once said to the old man, when I grow up and out of this, I want to become a mouse, but only if I can learn to swallow a boa constrictor. And the mystic was secretly relieved to hear him say such a thing, in that he had been harboring some uncertainties as to his siring of the lead. Cock-a-doodle-doo. Confirmation of a common suspicion. As far as life on the earthly level goes, it is best to wait till after death for help to arrive. Note, under normal planetary conditions, best always equates with easiest. Now tonight's PSA. It's pretty difficult to ever accomplish anything new with your consciousness until you realize that your consciousness, as is now, actually consists of two things going on in your brain that are normally taken to be the singular phenomenon of consciousness. A man wrote to the Department of Revenue and asked, but is it possible to have even more than two things going on? And they called him in for an audit. One thing you might consider before stepping into such a postal faux pas is that as long as you maintain that you don't get it, you won't get it. See, you just saved yourself the cost of a stamp and a wasted life. Cause when transcendental liners are going down, there's never anyone to yell, abandon ship. Thank Odin. Legend says that life once took such offense at something the mentally active creatures of one world did, that in retaliation it gave them the ability to think about things to such a degree that it could substitute for them actually experiencing it. Due to my heartfelt concern for people's general sensibility, I will not reveal to you the name of that particular planet. A man asked a mystic, is the awakening of consciousness involved with a bringing of the mind under control, a new understanding of what the mind is, a shutting up of the mind, or a moving of awareness beyond the mind? And the mystic fell to the ground and began rolling up and down nearby hills as he hollered, that's it, you've got it, that's it. Those who live by circumstantially caused personal problems can only be cured by externally based treatments. Thus, none can be cured, though none are particularly disturbed by the fact. This, another of the final words regarding mental health and the understudied matter of human stupidity. Tonight's household tips. Tip 1. You can identify stupid people by looking them directly in the eye. Tip 2. It's best not to look most people directly in the eye. And for those of you with no outstanding mortgage, an advanced tip, don't look in the mirror. The perils of criticism lies in physics, not morality. There was once a consciousness school whose approach was based solely on the student listening to what the master said to him. There was a later school which employed the method of the student having to respond to whatever the teacher said to him. Then there was a school after that one in which the activity consisted only of the student asking the master questions. But there was a group even later on whose teachings, in quotation marks, they always insisted that you add, whose teaching was transmitted by the method of the teacher saying nothing and the student hearing everything. One man awoke one morning to suddenly discover Tibet in his head. Or was it his bed? Perhaps it was India. Japan? Maybe it wasn't even his head. When it comes to the expansion and stabilization of one's own awareness, the only good method is a singular method. Until it quits working, then you need another soul one. Tonight's metaphysical update for those in search of. There are 3 types of messiahs: those who are dead, those now alive, and those yet to come. And now some additional news. There are 3 ways to get a severe crick in your neck. In some faraway mountains, or maybe it was ravines, no mountains, I imagine. It sounds much loftier and inspiring. Any damn way. In some faraway mountains, this guy found an ancient mystical dictionary which turned out to have only 1 page, with 1 word defined: consciousness. And you know what it said? It said, consciousness, a well-known synonym for many other things. Well, sir, after reading this, the man sat down on a rock and pondered it. Then reread it several times, always followed by some additional pondering. Then finally, it was as though some sort of light ignited in his head, and he immediately stood up and threw the book as far away as possible. Which takes us back to the beginning of the story, in some faraway mountains. The daughter of a mystic once said to him, "When I grow up, but not necessarily old, I want to become an author. But only if I can learn to write tales that would turn on themselves and consume themselves right out of existence." And the mystic was secretly relieved to hear her say such a thing, in that he had been experiencing some fear that he'd never have any offspring. Only minimally functioning consciousness can find any fault. And only minimally functioning consciousness can construct the worlds with which men ordinarily find fault. A king once said to his people, "Let us build a gigantic structure, the likes of which has never been seen. Let us put into its construction the best of which we are capable. But let us fashion it in such a way that most of us will find it ugly. Then we will be assured of mortal success." And the people, being common and ordinary, shouted out their approval. though later, unrealized by the majority, a few of their number wandered away from the project indescribably dissatisfied. A man asked a mystic, "Can you experience the liberation of consciousness and know the secret, yet still fall back into bouts of stupidity like everybody else?" And the mystic looked pretty crestfallen, if not pissed, as he mumbled, "Thanks a lot." What an encouraging thing to bring up. Of course, you being as sharp as you are, you recognize when an enlightened one is rhetorically playing a part to make a point, right? That is what he was doing, don't you think? Only unfinished products have the energy to preach or be preached to. More of the unknown history of this kind of activity. The first human to ever experience non-collective consciousness, who decided to try and talk about it to others, ended up swallowing himself and leaving behind him refuse and tailings which began the mystical teaching tradition. Alternate version. The first awakened man to ever stand at an echo point and yell into a canyon did so with his mouth closed. Seriously skewed edition. The reason that the enlightened have so few personal friends is because they won't even speak to themselves. Consider the matter of adverse judgments in this manner. Anything running slower than you are appears to be stupid, and all around you constantly are things running so. But also all about you are things operating at a faster speed than you. Do I have to ask you point blank how you figure you look to them? Inside of everyone's brain are two brains. Inside of every symphony orchestra are two orchestras. Inside of every movie and book are two movies and books. Inside of every marathon and tango are two other track events and dances. And inside of every brain are two brains, whose relationship to one another is unknown, inasmuch as each other's existence is a hazy concept. There was once a long-distance runner who continually sensed the unseen presence of another running along with him. At times he could hear him breathe and feel the fall of his feet somewhere around him. And when he'd speed up to try and lose his phantom partner, he'd stay apace, and slowing down accomplished no more. Then one day, whilst engaged in his normal run, he halted the run in his mind, and voila, a whole new course and way to move became available to this long-distance runner. And finally, be advised, limited edition. Anything of public concern to collective humanity is of no concern to a more alert individual. And nothing on the common agenda was conceived of by man. Specific suggestion, extreme blunt version. Nothing and no one is looking after you. And even saying that no one can help you but you is just a kind of wishful thinking, as long as you take you to be the you that feels itself a natural part of collective humanity and its common public concerns. Thus and verily it cameth to beeth that the private rallying cry of many who discover an actual path toward the Grail is, quick, run for your life, no, quicker than that, and in any other direction but the one in which you're headed. Zeus, what a relief, and what? Try again a bit of what we were talking about, that all of the mental life of man, all of that which men consider to be the realm of human consciousness, is built upon an engagement apparently of one man's thinking to another man's. And man can, of course, be plural mans. using the literary parentheses. But everything that constitutes the ordinary world of a man's mental awareness, everything that makes men feel, properly so, that they are singular in this three-dimensional version of Earth, it is all based upon engagement, or conflict, if you can see it in that manner, but it is indeed an engagement that the mind only operates, in a sense. If you want to look at it in an audible parallel, allegory, it only operates once a man finds Point Echo, which is just outside the Garden of Eden, and he finds this canyon and he hollers out something. And he hollers out like, "Screw you!" And he hollers, "Screw you too!" And suddenly a man goes, "Huh!" And he's thinking. He is now conscious. But you cannot holler out, for those of you of more genteel sensibilities, if he begins by hollering, "Yoo-hoo!" and nobody ever hollers, "Well, you too, to you." I mean, there you stand. And if you think Adam, if you like the crude version, you think Adam was embarrassed to be thrown out of a place where he didn't have to work and everything went fine, and he was thrown out in the welfare line. If you think that was humiliating, imagine how it would be that there he stood, Adam, before he got any clothes, sang up naked up on this high place, Echo Point, probably some of the Department of Interior Rangers around, at least some bears, and he goes, "Yoo-hoo!" And he just stands there ad infinitum, standing there naked with all of his things and intentions just hanging out publicly. And he hollers out, "Yoo-hoo!" And there's never a response. That would be, which it could not be, all you can do is barely imagine it, but that would have been the world of man had not man ever become conscious. Had not the brain began to be able to holler yoo-hoo to itself, and it go, "What?" or something. That there is the sensation of a response. The entire world, it seems to be the easiest to start off, again, talking about the world out there, the collective world. But this whole intellectual world, the whole realm of consciousness of man, would not have ever commenced and would not now be supported, would not now be continuing, were it not that the product of each person's consciousness in some way engages the like product of others. All the way from diametrically opposed ideas, of one man saying we should all be socialists, another man saying, "Well, you're an idiot, we should all be fascist." Somewhere between that kind of extreme to just quote, consider it this way, to just quote the feeling that no one thinks exactly like you do. Or another way, that even the world's best thinkers have it only partially correct. In other words, they only think up to a point in a manner parallel to yours. All of that is a sense of engagement. Were it not so, you understand, if there were no conflicting ideas, there would be no echo point. You could not holler out and get anything back. Same token, there's no way of looking at it. If all echoes agreed with you, Adam still would have received no reply. That if you hollered out the extent of everything that you ever thought, which is the extent of everything you're ever going to think, by the way, in case you're worried about that you could add to your repertoire later. As soon as Adam could holler, he hollered out, he spilled his guts. And if you think I'm stretching metaphors and legends, look at you. Every time you open your mouth, you spill your guts. The only reason your intent is to tell everything you know, given the chance. And the only thing that stops you from literally doing so is someone else, boor that they are, interrupts you. And those of you that get it, that even though say that you can't open your mouth and tell everything you know at any one time, those of you that are, I hear, with the right kind of gill-warming laugh out there, you understand that in a sense, truly, a person, just within a reasonable 2 or 3 minutes that you're in a serious discussion, an ordinary person, they do tell everything they know. The one way to look at it, ask somebody a question like, "Well, what's your opinion about our Prime Minister's latest State of the Union message? What's your idea? What's your reaction to so-and-so?" and give somebody, an ordinary sane person, give them leeway. Yeah. In other words, say, I'd like to hear what you say, and let them speak until they reach. Don't interrupt them. Let them speak, 2 or 3 minutes, probably at most, but let them really get to the point, not long, like you're listening, Let them get to the point that they seem satisfied that they reached some conclusion. That was all they know. They told you all they know. Once an ordinary man's mind and tongue, left to its own devices, reaches a point of contemporaneous satisfaction, that it is satisfied to stop. If you go, well, that's interesting. Is that really all you have to say on the matter? And say, well, that about covers it. He has told you everything, not only he knows on that subject, because the subject was irrelevant. He has told you everything he knows. In case anybody missed the point that Adam, the first time he spoke, first time Adam walked out to the echo point and decided it was time to holler out. No matter what you think, no matter how incongruous it sounds, literally. But once he opened his mouth to holler out, even if it was just yoo-hoo, that was all he knew, and that is all he was ever going to know. Because people do not speak. See, children, they're always, I know that there are these continuing debates and research done by psychologists and other people about why do some children speak earlier and later than others, or what is it that triggers the overt manifestation of the expression of human language in a child. I'll tell you when children begin to speak. And it varies a little bit from child to child. A child does not speak until it knows everything it's going to know. Then it speaks. Then it goes, Mama, or yoo-hoo. According to how aggressive it is, or it looks at its parents and says, screw you. But then you're back to Adam, which I shouldn't use that because Adam was actually more adult than most children, or some children are. Or it was the other way around. It's been so long since I read the story. At any rate, people tell all they know. All they know has been built upon resistance. All they know. The extent of consciousness has been built upon the echo system. There is no way, I can surely, or I'm going to abandon talking about this specifically. All you've got to do, you don't have to listen to me, you don't have to consider and try to wrap up all these several nights of speaking about this apparently directly. All you've got to do, go off in private, go in any room of the house you care for. Sit down, just you and your brain, just look up at it. Of course, you know how it goes, then you have to look off, have to look off. You look off, and then you look back, and you look off, and you look back, and you look off, and you look back, and you realize, at any given moment, you realize several things. One of them was I just did in passing. You realize at any given moment you think about everything you know. You do it continually. And only the simple-minded, that is ordinary sane people, the kind of viewers who do not watch our show, only a simple-minded person would say, wait a minute, in a split second I do not think of everything I know. I turned and looked, and I suddenly, all I was thinking about was what that guy said to me this afternoon at the service station. In fact, I did it several times. I caught myself doing it. So anyway, that's not all I know. It is. And the mind will say, well, it's not. And they start saying, well, you better sit down because I can tell you everything I've ever read. I can tell you all the things I remember from college. And of course, the question that they can't respond to is, well, why don't you ever think about them? Why don't you think about what the guy said to you at the service station? Why is it for the last 5 minutes, every time you look up, you're thinking of that? I don't know, I just got stuck on it. Well, that's right. People don't get stuck on being themselves, do they? No, not unless they're sane. If they get unstuck on themselves, they're insane. Mama, I think maybe we'll take Hubert up back to that hospital. You realize I go into him some mornings to wake him up, and I say, Hubert? He'll go, Hubert's not here. And other mornings I go in, I'll say, Hubert, it's time to get up and slap the hogs. And he'll say, how many times I have to tell you my name is Albert? And sometimes I'll walk in and Hubert will already be awake and he'll be talking to himself. I don't mean just mumbling. He'll be saying, well, how are you this morning? He'll go, well, fine, but what are you doing in my room? He'll go, well, I just came in to awaken you, remind you it was time for the chores. And he goes, well, I told you I quit. So, in other words, Hubert is now not telling everything he knows. continually, he apparently has become more than one person, and we call him insane, not sane. You can look in your own head. You remember where we got this is you look up and observe. If a person would do it, when I say that you are continually given any reasonable opportunity, just a few minutes, a person overtly will tell everything they know, regardless of the fact that ordinary minds will say they didn't literally tell everything they know because they know a lot more than that. Yeah, well, how didn't they do it? They didn't have enough time. I didn't stop them. I kept nodding. And he finally said, well, that's it. All right. Nobody's ever going to get that. So in that case, why not refine it and go into what I just pointed out, that sit by yourself and look up at your brain, and if you have any propensity, any potential to ever accomplishing this, you simply notice. It may take you a few seconds, and it may take you a few years. It can take you a few decades, and it becomes a few seconds because you realize, well, shit, I knew this 20 years ago. And you think, yeah, but I didn't really, I don't know it. But if you sit there by yourself, you keep looking up, I say that not only will an ordinary person tell everything they know, given any reasonable opportunity to do so, that you do it mentally by yourself. And I say, I challenge you, go sit down and do it. And you sit down and do it, and you do it for a few minutes. And I come in the room, and I say, all right, do you realize that you continually, just from every time that your attention shifts, every time your mind goes from saying one thing, running down one bar of one song, it is like a conversation. It is as though you told everything you know in a conversation, and then somebody else started talking. That's when your mind looks off and you do something else. And I say to you, did you notice in the last 5 minutes, did you try and look up and see what you were thinking, and then you'd lose it, and yeah, I understand. What were you doing? Well, for some reason, I kept going through what that guy said at the service station today. And I go, well, I just want to point out to you, forget conversation between two people in the external world. Internally, you continually, to yourself, I'll give you the extent of your consciousness, your degree of your, in the fullest sense of the word, your intelligence. What you know, you have been telling yourself that while sitting there in the room by yourself for the last 5 minutes, engaged in this experiment. And you say, well, no, I didn't. And I say, yes, you did. And you go, no, I didn't, because all I did every time I'd look up, to tell you the truth, I believe every time I looked up, I'd gone back to some thing about that guy in the service station, and I'd kept repeating it over and over. And I said, well, that's all you know. And you say, well, it's not all I know. You know darn well I know more than that. And then my clever comeback is, so how come that's all you said? How come that's all you thought? And of course, by then you throw me out of your house, out of your head. You can notice, back to where this part started, this paragraph, you can find out inside of your own brain that the mind only operates while it's engaged with something that apparently is external to itself. It is pushing against something. If you took some of the older picturizations about enlightenment, etc., one of the ancient ones about stilling the mind until it becomes a perfect reflector, like the calm surface of a lake that perfectly in some way reflects reality, rather than churning it up, rather than dealing with it piecemeal, rather than it being a fractured picture, such as is visually known to anyone, that you look upon the surface of a lake with a few ripples in it, and if there's a tree above it, you can look down if you know it's a tree, or by the colors you know it's a tree, but it looks like a Monet painting, which I know is in the art world, no one's ever come up with the theory that such people as Monet, and trying to show it's the light reflected, that he did observe the pond in his backyard, the light reflected, and how it would show the sun, and it was just take your brush, the tip of it, and do kind of dots, not pointillism, but one kind of spats, and it represented. People have come up with the idea, well, what it did was he sat there and it represented the fracturing of light as he looked upon the pool in his backyard, reflecting the trees and the bushes. Okay, why not? How about this? If he had been a Zen Monet, he wouldn't need to go out in the backyard and look at the lake, which is all right. He would have looked at his mind and thought, oh my God, I got a little pond in my back brain. At any rate, to use that kind of picturization, that some sense of awakening or enlightenment would be that the mind is still to the point that a man's consciousness is a perfect reflection. It adds nothing. At other times, in other areas, it's been called the direct perception, the direct seeing into the nature of life, which can sound fine, and people go, well, I wonder what that means, and best you can come up with if you've never experienced it. Or they even sometimes will attempt to add a CF to it as compared to what it is now that you look upon life, and what are you doing when you look upon life? You are constantly commenting on it. It is a running voiceover, or in the case of some, a voice under. But it's not up to you to judge. It's like a running commentary on what you're seeing. And it doesn't have to be critical. It doesn't have to be in any specific time something that would qualify as a direct criticism of what you're observing. All it takes is a commentary on life, which is a reflection, or which is equitable to the ripples on a pond. And so even though the ripples on a pond, that you can look down in it and you can see there's this big willow tree hanging out over it in the limbs, and you look at it and you know, well, that's the limbs of a tree. But it's all like this, and the waves can get out of sync, and it's harder to see sometimes, it's easier to see. But the point is, by anyone's definition, it is not a perfect reflection of the branches of the tree hanging over the lake. Now, anyone understands that. And it doesn't mean that that's a criticism. It's not that you go, God, how ugly that tree is, when it's reflected in the surface of a disturbed pond. It doesn't have to be that. As long as it's a commentary, it's ripples. As long as it's a commentary, the seeing of what's going on, now in the full sense of consciousness, not just limited to the sense of sight, the consciousness of what's going on is not perfect. It is fragmented, it is distorted, and it doesn't have to be critical. It's not that you're saying, I don't like what I'm seeing. As long as you're thinking, I'm seeing what I'm seeing. It's broken up, being the point. So the idea that another state of consciousness, or the Buddhist idea of enlightenment, the Sufi and Tibetan of a liberation or an awakening of consciousness at another level, or to another level, would be, I suggest to you, the hollowing into the otherwise echo canyon of consciousness, that kind of state would be. Now, there is a similarity between that and this undisturbed surface of a lake, is you holler, scream into, speak into this echo canyon, and nothing comes back. Again, remember, you can't start off that way. It has to start off otherwise, or the mind could not ever commence operation. But this other state is, there is no commentary. You are not engaged with anybody. That's why you can't, those of you understanding this, may sound childish to you now, but that's why you cannot become awakened by attempting to become a good Muslim. Because to become a good Muslim, you have to be in some way engaged with Christians, in some way in conflict with Jews. You can't become awakened by being a splendid Hindu, because in some way you've got to be in conflict. You understand? I'm just using that. I could have used socialists and fascists, but except there seems to be more people believe that some sort of spiritual enlightenment might be possible through religion as opposed to political system. I mean, that's their opinion. You know. I figured I'd let it slide. Of course, there have been those in the past that believe that it was absolutely, damn near impossible to ever reach a higher state of consciousness if you drove a Ford product instead of a General Motors. So, as they used to say in Detroit, it takes all kinds. I understand they don't say that a lot anymore, but we're getting too far afield, I think. Tonight also included was something else I'd been talking about in general, but was about the same matter. That if you accept anything that's of common concern to humans, and there's always a temptation to stop at this point and to kick around and stir up dust and try to grab people metaphorically by the shoulders and say, now listen, it's simpler than it sounds, but it's not as simple as you think it sounds. No. That no matter where you are, no matter when you are in history, whatever, in your locale, whatever is the public concern, what seems to be the pressing, the reasonable. Now I'm talking about common consensus, that it's just you walk out in the street in the daytime. Nowadays, of course, you can do it by walking out in the street of the electronic media. You can turn on TV, but you find out new legislation concerning the health of our citizens is the number one priority that our Prime Minister says it is, our Diet says it is, our House of Congress, the political commentators, everyone, all right-thinking, decent. It's everywhere. It's in the air. You know it comes and goes, but it's in the air right now that if they poll the people right here in Norway, it's turned out that 95% of the people, if you say, what is the most important pressing problems to us Swedes today, other than them being lost there in Norway taking this quiz, but if you say, what is, now I guess it was the pollster was lost, but anyway, if you say, what is the most pressing problem to us Swedes today, 98% say health care. All right. And of course, health care, you got to say, well, health, a man's health is important. At any rate, health care, that is it's at the top of the common public agenda. It is the most pressing problem of the day. Anything that is on the public agenda that collective humanity finds to be of concern, there's no way to put this, I keep skating around it, it is absolutely of no concern to someone involved with this. And you know that's not literally true because your health should be your concern, not your hobby, but you've got to be concerned about your health if you're unhealthy. But the collective concern, the public concerns of collective humanity are of no concern to a more alert individual. And when I say of no concern, surely you recognize, just as I said, that your health would be of concern, but not thinking about it. Whatever the public agenda, whatever the common concern is at your time and your place, and by concern, it's always going to end up in the civilized world to be to do with the world of the civilized, the world conceived of by the mind, civilization. Because we're still bypassing, if you're living in a civilized country, the public concerns are not going to be over eating enough. Someone's always going to holler, well, we got poor people who are going without, which is always there and it's nothing new. But the heart of the mainstream of any civilized area and era, the instinctive concerns, the physical survival concerns are not part of what would nowadays call the public agenda. Right here today in Turkey, here we are in 1998, it is not the government, the pollsters, the media, the pressing concern of the day when we go out, as they just recently did, and they poll to ask us Bulgarians he's lost again, to ask us Bulgarians, what do you consider to be the most common pressing problems facing us Romanians today here in Turkey? 98%, by God, will not say getting enough to eat. And we all know that there are people going hungry everywhere in the world. But what is part of the public agenda, other than a few voices that life always causes to be raised, it will not be going hungry. I know that gets hard to see sometimes, so how about this? This is just as instinctive, this is just as survival-based. 98%, nay, not even 9%, nay, not even 1% of people, when polled, if you ask what is the most pressing problems facing us Armenians today, will they say, getting enough sex? Even if individually here and there we'll assume that there's some real ugly people, I resent that may not be getting enough. It will not be part of the collective concern of humanity. Do you understand? The concerns always come out. They're always couched in terms of that which is indicative to the civilized world. Health care. See, health care is not the same as health. Health care is into the world of civilization, into the concocted mental construct of man, that is the world of government, the world of somewhere out there collectively. Health care, we all know, is legislation. If not legislation, social programs, perhaps of voluntary nature, but they are programs that are based upon collective action, or at least collective concern. That's not the same as health. Health care is not the same as health. So the point is, even though I have to say it directly, or else talk about it forever, if you understand this, and you suddenly hear, now I say you understand this, if you understand anything at all yourself, you don't have to understand this, but if you understand anything at all about life, you recognize that whatever the common concern is, the pressing concern of the day or of the month or of the year in your area, that the collective humanity, collective man, we're talking about the sane, reasonable, the apparent leaders of this area, whatever they say the concerns are, and don't worry about where it came from or whether the president made it up or just some congressman just thought up this to forget all that. If it is now, for any length of time, that so-and-so is out here, it's a social, it is a collective problem. It is one of the highest problems on the agenda facing us finished people today. If it is, this is not the point, but I've got to get out of the way. It's screw that, if you understand anything. And that doesn't begin to cover it. It's just, if you spend any time, if you're attracted at all, if it even gets you enough to where your ear wants to off balance you just several millimeters or milligrams, that you go over like, huh, I never thought about that. If you're a bit more conscious, there's a reason you never thought about that. It's a waste of time. Or to think, well, perhaps I should think about this. If it's something you should think about, and you've got any intelligence, you would have thought about it already. I ain't going with this since we're out of time, but it ends up sounding as though I'm doing either a serious sermon or I'm doing almost a side-splitting satire and parody of one hectoring and sermonizing. But it's pointing to a useful individual point. Whatever is part of the collective consciousness of your area, and it's becoming, generally, of your area. It is what it should be. It is not foolish. It's not even open to credit. It's not foolish and it's not foolish. It just is. If right now the pressing concern is tax reform. Again, notice how slippery it gets. That doesn't mean that whether you got enough money to do what you want to or enough to eat is of no concern, which taxes equal money. But tax reform is not the same thing any more than your health is the same thing as health care. They're different things. But let's say it can be health care, tax reform, whatever else it is. And it's just out there. It is part of your local milieu. It is part of the non-physical environment of your area. That right now you just walk in the street, as I said, either literally or figuratively, and the most pressing problem, the intelligentsia, the leaders, just well-informed, concerned citizens, the main subject on which people are conversing is health care. All right. It simply is. That is now part of the public, collective agenda, list of concerns, perhaps the greatest one of that area. There's no other way I can put it. Think of anything but that. If you got to think, if you cannot wipe your mind still as a Zen lake, and you got to think, for God's sake, don't think about that kind of shit. And for a very good reason. Would you explain it to me? No. It's impossible. It's impossible to explain why. There's no reason why. Because I'm telling you, I've told you already, you should be, in a sense, in favor of it. Not the specific, but you should be in favor of the fact that your local area where you're living, which is becoming more and more just the planet Earth, but you should be thankful for the fact that they still got these pissant concerns. If they didn't, I can put this crude, they'd have so much time on their hand, there would be the possibility, as the sky watchers keep fearing, that we could begin to regress. Because if men didn't have these kind of pissant, meaningless concerns over tax reform, then they'd be sitting around, first thing you know, they'd get tired of whittling and looking at their fingernails, and they'd start playing grab ass again, like they did before the Roman Empire. And people would start pushing each other. First thing you know, boys, read civilizations, read whole groups, be down the dirt fighting again over nothing. Better yet, they should concern themselves with these kind of penny-ante, moot problems. And that's why I said, in a sense, you should be thankful. But not over the specifics. But the point is, you've finally got to see for yourself that whatever, I'm going to try to get tonight finally to pointing as close as I can to why I keep saying this has potential individual use, as you realize it changes, or it has the opportunity to change where you attempt to stand internally. Because you can cut away the point echo, where you stand out there and you're hollering and listening back to what civilization, what's going on in your area. What life I should be able to just say life now because it doesn't matter where you live. It just seems to change. The Chinese right now, as big as it is, certain areas of China they have one thing on the top of their public agenda, their concerns, and you move over to India and it's got something else, and you move to Brazil and it's something else. So it's just life. Whatever the concern is that is part of the collective, public, commonly held agenda list of concerns that we should have here as Peruvians, whatever it is, you can at least whittle away again if you need to, which for a long time I know people do. It's a continuing process of whittle away the kinds of things you allow your mind to entertain. Well, here's another one that you can forget. Tax reform, health care. Of course, if you get good at it, plus you got to have a pretty darn good memory. Read memory that works. It doesn't take all that long. I say you keep narrowing it down. If your memory was good enough, if you're already on a fast train to Georgia, if not Istanbul, you can whittle away what it is that you would let your mind play with real shortly. Nowadays, you could turn on the news, turn on network news and listen to it probably less than the full 30 minutes. And if you had any understanding going in and any good memory to see you through, before the newscast was out, you would have whittled down everything necessary about which you no longer need to ever concern yourself. You understand? The inference being whatever seems to be the natural concerns of humanity worldwide in this enlightened day and time, forget it. It's not bad or it's not right or wrong. It's not open to criticism. It's the way things are, and it's got nothing to do with you. And once you see it, it's more than got nothing to do with you. And it's really more than a waste of time, which is what I guess some people's mind would first interpret what I'm saying to mean. For me to say, well, it's got nothing to do with you, and you say, oh, so I see that me thinking about it's a waste of time. Yeah, but it's worse than that. Because that should be worse than enough. But you can whittle away. Then every time you look up at your mind, see the way it is now, the mind will accept itself. Every time an ordinary person is aware of something they're thinking, it is open to some criticism, some specific analyzation from their local anecdotal viewpoint. It's not open to any analyzation once you understand what's going on. It's all noise. It's all traffic. It's all ripples on a lake. And it's only ordinary minds that if it's pointed out that there might be some possibility that this could be otherwise, the ordinary mind will look and go, well, yeah, I could do better. I could take all the purple Dodges out of the traffic. That's the same idea as if I could just overcome my psychological difficulties. Psychological difficulties are a man's psychological. Well, if I could just perhaps straighten out some of my personality problems. A man's personality problems are his personality, or is his personality. When you're doing such as this, there's nothing against which to push. That is the initial purpose of what seems to be mystical teachings, mystical systems. Not that people involved with it after it once becomes public and continue to support them understand that. That was the only reason. Let me make you a quick metaphor. That was the only reason that Buddha agreed. That all the monks said, let us start a thing called Buddhism. Let's go tell people about it. And Muhammad did the same thing. Jesus did, Abraham. And he said, oh, no. And they kept coming back, oh, let us do it. And he went, no. Hey, let's do it. And he went, well, and he thought about it and he thought, well, okay. Because he knew that he hoped that those who might have the ability to ever reach Buddhahood would only start studying the teachings of Buddha and only do it for so long until they realized, he just let them do this so we'd have something to push against until we could find out that the window was open, we could jump off the train. Muhammad only invented Islam so that those who might eventually actually become real Muslims could start out having something to think about and go, well, wait a minute. Let me see. Do I believe that? Or how's that compared to what we used to believe? And it would be as though Muhammad stands back there behind them going, come on, faster. Come on, faster. And they go, oh, where? What direction? Any but the way you're going. Yeah, but wait a minute. I was thinking about something important that you said or that they said you said. Yeah. But you've already thought about something else. Then you end up with, them asking Confucius, could you give us the true secret of enlightenment? The true way to go about it. And he said, yes, don't stand there. They went, where? He said, there. Well, where? He went, there. Which really stands some of them because they thought, well, this is pre-Zen. What's he doing talking in such conundrums? Now, of course, that too kind of surprised the old man because he reached in his back pocket and he didn't even have a pack of conundrums. And he went, well, no, I meant from the hour. Yes. Well, there was one. Somebody said that they found that they opened, I think it was software, and said they opened the package and it said, quote, by opening this package, you accept the terms and conditions of, which obviously inside they had, if those of you who have never run across that in other circumstances, a kind of legalistic. It's not a ploy. It does have a specific intent that by breaking the seal and opening this package, that act conveys your passive acceptance of the terms of our agreement, your purchase agreement, but texting, copywriting, etc. I was going to use this. I know we're running out. It's the same thing I'm talking about tonight, that you accept life. Once you open the package of what is out there and people says there's importance and this and that, you have bought into it. It does no good later. Well, everybody has to originally shouting out down in from Adam's echo point. But after you once open it up, you have accepted the terms of the agreement. And you don't know what the damn agreement is. You open it before you know. You can think, well, this is a dirty trick. I don't know the agreement. I don't know what it is. But if you open it, then it says you have tacitly, you have legally agreed to the terms herein. That's what you do by taking the ideas that life says are important. You're stuck with it. Until you learn how. Several ways I can put it. Either to repackage the thing and seal it back up, nobody knows, and send it back. Or quit using it, just throw it away where it was to where it doesn't matter. Or the third one, of course, is leave it all there, in your place, and leave home. Go somewhere and don't ever come back. Of course, you can get a metaphysical attorney to defend you.